Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a NewDEAL Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
In the final days of 2024, New Deal CEO and an Honorable Profession co-host Debbie Cox Bultan hosted a 2025 state legislative preview with Oregon House Majority Leader Ben Bowman, Pennsylvania Speaker of the House Joanna McClinton, and Georgia Democratic Caucus Chair Representative Tanya Miller. We're thrilled to share that conversation with you today as these New Deal leaders recap their 2024 accomplishments, from lowering prescription costs for Pennsylvania seniors to passing landmark bipartisan bills that address Oregon's housing shortage. And they also look towards their goals for 2025. They talk about the need to make government oversight a top priority to ensure that state governments serve their constituents as effectively as possible, how Democratic caucuses can communicate with voters and the press, and why economic issues from jobs to housing to healthcare should be every elected official's top priority in 2025. I hope you enjoy this conversation and gain some insights on the top issues at play in the states this year.
Speaker McClinton, let me turn to you first. Sitting as the Speaker of the House in the only divided legislature in the country, and hanging on to your majority, congratulations, in the House. Tell us about how things look in Pennsylvania.
So thank you, Debbie, for having us all. Good afternoon to everybody who's joining us or watching this later. Hello from Pennsylvania. Specifically, I'm in West Philly in my district office right now, and I am so grateful that notwithstanding a really tough Tuesday, November the 5th, that our caucus was able to hold on to our one-seat majority. And as a result of that, we look forward to doing great work in our next two-year session, which officially will kick off on January the 7th. We were able to hold on to our majority because Pennsylvania voters saw how we fought, and not only how hard we fought, but how we won battles for them with our legislative agenda, how we kept them first. We were able to deliver for what I call my wisest neighbors or our senior citizens. We were able to expand the income eligibility for our largest benefit program that helps seniors. It's called the Property Tax Rent Rebate Program. We were able to help expand affordability of prescriptions. We were able to help caregivers and parents by tripling the child tax credit or dependent care tax credit for those who were doing their taxes. And my biggest pride and joy is we were able to put a new $1.1 billion in our public school system all across Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, for those who don't know, unfortunately, we were at the bottom of the nation in how we funded our public schools, and a lawsuit that took almost 10 years was finally decided in February of 2023. And I'm so proud that in our last budget, we began to right that wrong that unfortunately had been for generations. And while we only have one seat majority, so it is still very humble, we look forward to continuing to show our leadership because we know that we have to be pragmatic, we got to be practical, and we look forward to doubling down on cutting costs, making sure there's more access to healthcare, strengthening our public safety, and building an economy that works for everyone, where there are great jobs not too far from home, and of course, good public schools right in your community.
Wonderful. Thank you, Speaker McClinton. I'll come back with a follow-up question, but let me turn to Majority Leader Bowman in the Oregon House. You have a very different scenario in Oregon, of course. You are able to hold on to both of your supermajorities in Oregon by a hair. So tell us what how things look from where you are.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Debbie, for inviting me to be part of this. I have been a huge beneficiary of the New Deal Network, so I'm just really grateful to be part of the presentation today. So I'll put you in my shoes on election night. So we're all the Democrats are together at our election night party, and we're starting to see these horrible national results, and it becomes clear that we've lost the White House, and the Senate is going to turn red, and we weren't able to win the House. And at the same time, we picked up a seat in the Oregon House. We won back a supermajority. In the Senate, we won an additional seat, won a supermajority, 60% in both chambers, and we flipped our congressional district. So there's this sense of fear about what's happening at the national level, but also a lot of hope and optimism about what we can do at the state level to deliver for Oregonians. So, I was talking to my team about, well, what are the lessons learned? Like, what did we learn? How did this happen? And I actually think that the 2024 New Deal messaging guide is a really good framework for how to think about what worked for us in Oregon. We led with the economy. We talked about affordability issues that were affecting all of our constituents, regardless of their political beliefs. We talked about freedom. We were not afraid to talk about abortion and protecting the right to access abortion for everyone in Oregon. And we drew contrasts with the Republicans. Those were the three key points of the messaging guide. And obviously that looks different in different districts. But as a guide, I think that is essentially the plan that we followed. As we're looking ahead, in our previous session, we had three gigantic bipartisan packages. We did an unprecedented housing package to address our housing supply issues. We have a severe addiction and recovery challenge in our state, and we passed unprecedented resources into that problem. And for the first time in modern Oregon history, we passed campaign finance reform, which right now we're one of the only states in the country with zero restrictions on contributions of any size. So I think building on that work and learning from what we heard from voters in the election, we're focusing first and foremost on affordability issues, everything from housing to utility rates to the cost of healthcare. There's a lot of work to be done in my state and I think across the country. We're also going to be talking and working on public safety issues, which continue to be a prominent issue for Oregonians. And then one that I'm hoping we get some time to talk about today, making government work. I think for too long, we've allowed Republicans to be the party of oversight and accountability, but it's actually our party who believes that government can solve problems and make people's lives better. And so it's on us to make sure that government is actually delivering results and making people's lives better. So we're going to lead proudly as a caucus on that issue. And then finally, the sort of catch-all issue is protecting Oregonians' rights and freedoms. And this is where there will be some things that we assume the federal government will do that could put some Oregonians at risk. And we're not going to be afraid to stand up when we need to without taking our eye off the ball of delivering for Oregonians. So that's a little bit about how I'm thinking about the next couple of years. But again, thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Representative Bowman. That's great. Now, let's come back and talk about making government work better, because I couldn't agree with you more about how important that is. But let me turn to Representative Miller for her opening comments. Obviously, coming from a very different state where Georgia Democrats do not have either chamber, although you did pick up a couple seats, maybe not as many as you hoped, and who's recently elected caucus chair. So great to have you, Representative Miller. Tell us a little bit about what your caucus is on your caucus mind right now.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. Thanks for having me. Hello to the speaker, hello to the majority leader, and everybody watching, and to my New Deal friends. This sort of feels like a dispatch from the resistance. Of course, we do not have the majority in any house. And of course, we're dealing with a Republican trifecta. In Georgia, the governor's mansion is controlled by Republicans, as are both of the houses in our General Assembly. So our posture is a little bit different. We are always fighting back and playing defense on terrible Republican policies that we think do not center Georgia families and Georgia small businesses and Georgia communities. So our focus is going to be on messaging and communications. We know that we have to be speaking to our electorate, both our base and both, our base and the folks that we're trying to win over here, independents, as well as voters who are disengaged. And so our job is a little bit different. We will be telling the folks and messaging a vision for Georgia that is very different than what Republicans have been presenting. We are 80 strong. We are about 45% of the House of Representatives. There are 180 members. This is the biggest class, I guess, of Democrats. Our party is the biggest. Our caucus is the biggest, as it has been since we lost the majority many, many moons ago. So we have picked up seats continuously since 2016. We have not lost ground. And while we did not win as much as we wanted to this last session, we are laser focused on 2026. Our agenda will be one, big external focus, right? Talking to the people, making sure that people understand what we stand for. Every single issue we champion will have an economic tie to it. We know that the folks in Georgia care about the economy. Education is related to the economy. Jobs are related to the economy. Affordable housing is related to the economy. Healthcare is related to the economy. So all of our messaging will be focusing on these critical, as we call them, kitchen table issues with an eye towards the economy. We want to send the message to Georgians that we are the party of opportunity. We are the party that wants every Georgian to prosper. And so you will see legislative ideas that we won't have the votes to of course, pass. But certainly we will present that vision to the people, and we will push back on what we know will be Republican priorities. Ironically, they have already come out and said that they are going to make a priority dealing with girls in sports, transgender girls in sports. This, of course, is a tried and true tactic of Republicans, coming up with solutions to problems that don't exist. This is not an issue in Georgia, but they bait us with this issue to continue to sow division all across the state between the Democrats and the Republicans, and even within our own party. It will be our job to refocus people and to make sure that we do not let them get a handle on the messaging, that we continue to talk to the people about the things that they care about. We are one of the worst states in the country for healthcare. We're number 1 or 2 for maternal mortality. We have 300,000 children that lost their health care when Medicaid unwound. We have a failed pathways program that the governor keeps championing. It's more expensive than expanding Medicaid, and it's less effective. So we will be laser focused in on Republican mismanagement, the Republicans' abject failure to really focus in on what matters most to Georgians. And that is that their families have access to the American dream, that they're healthy, that they're safe, and that their children have access to a quality education. So we'll be on the defense a lot, guys, but we certainly will be on the offense when it comes to messaging and making sure people understand who we are as a Democratic Party. We are not the loudest voices. We are a party that is focused on the same things that Georgians are focused on. And those are the things I just outlined and my colleagues are talking about. So this is really heartening that we are sort of singing from the same hymn book across this country to our constituents.
Thank you so much, Representative Miller. It was fantastic, all three of you. And I mean, just to underscore the point, right, as we talked about what happened November 5th with the loss of both houses here in Washington, D.C., again, states are going to be on the front lines of all of this, whether you're playing defense in Georgia or you've got supermajorities in Oregon. So I love that we have the gamut here represented to talk about, and to your point, Representative Miller, across all of your states, very different scenarios, but talking about the same things and talking about the issues that matter most to people. So Speaker McClinton, let me go back to you again, divided government. I heard, Ben, you talk about bipartisan solutions, even with supermajorities. What do you think, Speaker, where are there opportunities, do you think, in bringing the two parties together in Pennsylvania to drive some results?
So I'm proud that in our first session in 12 years being in the majority, we had 95% of our bills passed in a bipartisan fashion. Because the majority is so slim and trim and thin, most of the ideas appeal to moderate Republicans. We still have Republican strongholds in certain suburbs of both Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh. And as a result, they are not a part of the largest mass of Pennsylvania, which is rural. They're like right outside of cities. And their views are very similar to views that I have right here in West Philly. I'm one of those ones. I also serve Delaware County because I'm on the edge of the city. And because so many neighbors have similar priorities, most of our bills were bipartisan. We passed the first gun safety bills in over 10 years. Unfortunately, they're stuck in our Republican Senate. One was an extreme red flag law. One was on banning ghost guns. Like all of them had just about 2 or 3, but a few Republican votes. So when we get back to business next year, from our economy to public safety, we anticipate there to be Republican votes. And it's trickle. It's not the whole caucus because, as I said, most of our state is rural. So many Republicans serve rural, very conservative communities whose issues are similar, but solutions look a lot different. So I look forward to working across the aisle. Before the month of November ended, I called the new Republican leader so that we could have, just a no agenda discussion. Congratulated him already right after their leadership election and just let him know, like, we are coming from the same place, right? We're in charge. The voters are not sending mixed messages. They've sent us back in the majority a second time. We had 9 special elections that ensued from November 22 to, the end of our term. People retired and all sorts of scenarios. So we're still in charge and we want to work with you and we want to work together. And my message as Speaker Designate is we want to have, great, healthy debate from every angle, but we want it to be respectful. And a lot of times in the last session, I had to use the gavel a lot because people knew they were breaking our House rules and not following protocol and being respectful.
Yeah, thank you for that. Leader Bowman, let me turn to you and let's talk about this making government work better and results. I think that, there is a feeling in my mind, at least, that, some of our issues with just, how people are civically engaged these days, whether, our democracy woes, a number of things kind of all tie back in my mind to this idea of whether or not government can deliver for the American people, right? And so tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about following up on some of the messaging you just said in terms of tangible results for Oregonians.
Yeah, it's a great question. I totally agree. I think a core driver of the distrust in government and other institutions is that the government isn't delivering results for people. And so fixing that problem is key to actually strengthening our democracy. So I'm thinking about it in a couple ways. I was bummed to miss the last New Deal conference because you all had Jen Pahlka there. And I think Jen Pahlka is like one of the smartest people thinking and talking about this, about building state capacity. Recoding America is the book recommendation. If folks haven't read it yet, it's incredibly powerful. So there's a lot of root causes to this problem. Like if you think back to the federal government of the FDR era or of the LBJ era, government was a tool to solve problems quickly. It moved very quickly to solve the biggest problems that people were facing. But today, government, for good reason in some cases, has long processes and procedures and appeals, and it's hard to move quickly. So what can we actually do to shift things? A couple things. One, we need to do smart oversight. Not partisan oversight, not shaming and blaming state agencies oversight, but oversight that is rooted in asking the question, why isn't this working and how do we fix it? And one of the revelations from Pahlka's book is like, actually, if you dig into why a lot of government programs aren't working, it's not the implementers, it's not the agencies, it's the legislators who've sort of layered on top of each other regulations and rules over a period of decades that make it very hard to maneuver. So I think it's asking questions like that. And for legislators, I don't know what the experience is for Chair Miller or Speaker McClinton in their states, but in my state, I think there has historically been a sense that the legislator's job is done when the bill is passed. Like we passed the bill, we got the budget, we're done here. And I think that's the wrong framing. We are done when the results are achieved. We are done when people's lives are better and their experiences are changed. So that means watchdogging bills after they're passed. It means following up on them the next session to see what tweaks you need to make and just keeping your eye on the ball. So, in terms of how we are operationalizing this, we've worked with the Levin Center, who I think the Levin Center was also at your last convening. They're fantastic as well. And where we've landed, we had a bipartisan work group, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, that worked for about a year on crafting recommendations to strengthen the branch's capacity to do this work. And like the core belief for us is the best answer isn't create an oversight committee and just let that committee, haul agencies in. It's to embed an oversight mindset and culture throughout the legislative committees. So we've already started doing new training for new legislators, training for chairs and vice chairs. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work in an oversight agenda into each committee plan for each of our committees, and to just very seriously operationalize a different way of thinking about our role as legislators. It's not just about passing policies. It's not just about representing constituents. It's about doing oversight and making sure government's working better. The micro solutions for each agency are unique, and they are unique because of the unique laws and policies that have created the log jams or created the challenges. But I think the best way to unearth those specific and individual challenges is to have a systemic approach throughout the legislative branch. So that's a little bit about how I'm thinking about it. It's going to be a big challenge, but I think it's what voters want from us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I'm just going to do a little plug. Here's the book and I'm gonna give a plug for my team, because only in a New Deal event would this have been a white elephant gift yesterday at our party. That's a true story. So I had to pull it out of my backpack to show it. So Chair Miller, I have a different question for you, which is, I loved what you were talking about, kind of about the different role that you have to think about for your caucus being in the minority. I guess my question to you is how do you reach people? How do you get those messages out? I think that was another takeaway from the election, in our post-election recap, where we talked to a lot of people around the country, including folks who outperformed the top of the ticket. One of the things we heard from people about what we need to do moving forward is how we communicate in different ways to get these messages across in this era of fractured media and other things. And if you've got the majority with the bullhorn, tell me about kind of what your strategies are for reaching people out where they live to get this message through.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we will approach comms is really this. It has to be multi-stream, multifaceted, multilingual. It has to go all places, but it has to be consistent. I think there is a place for sort of traditional messaging, where, you have folks in their district, you have folks doing the town halls, you have folks doing the listening sessions, you have folks doing the newsletters. All of those things are great, but certainly leveraging media, increased press conferences. I think we need to be talking to a gaggle of reporters every Monday, weekly, just reporting out on what's going on down at the General Assembly. That's not something that we've done in the past. That's something that we intend to do now. We are also exploring and continuing to sort of pioneer new ways to use social media, to refine our message on social media, not just on the Facebook, right? The Facebook, but, our folks are getting news. We learned this from the last cycle. A significant number of voters are listening to podcasts. They are tuning into these podcasts. The influence of podcasters, the influence of sort of this democratization of the media, is really sort of new territory. And so we plan to dispatch our best messengers into all of those spaces. We are launching a podcast this session. It's still in the works, but we're really excited about it. We plan to be using videos. We plan to be spending a ton of money. I actually had dinner with the speaker at a conference that we both were, and he shared with me how much Republicans spent on comms. They really blitzed us on the comms this past election cycle, and our budget is probably going to be tripled, which means that we have got to invest in not only reaching people, blasting this message out in a consistent way to everyone, multilingual. We also have to be, constantly making sure that we have the resources to keep up with Republicans and that we are being clear about our brand. I think that's a struggle that Democrats are sort of reckoning with now. Who are we? Of course, we're who we are. We have our values. They're tried and true. We're not going to abandon them. But how do we present those values to people in a way that it feels like those values resonate with them? It feels like we're not in some ivory tower pontificating about all of these things, but we're actually on the front lines understanding exactly these issues that they are facing, right down to their pocketbook, right down to the safety of their children matriculating back and forth to school, right down to how much their deductible is, right down to how long it takes them to get procedures cleared because of the logjam with insurance companies and all kinds of flaws in our healthcare system. So it is essentially being everywhere all the time, consistently talking to folks about who we are and more importantly about who they are, and letting them know that we hear them, that we see them, that they are centered in the work that we do. I think you will see less politicians in our sort of media plan, and you will see more everyday people telling those stories, letting those voices be heard, elevating them, and then championing them, being a fighter for those voices. So it will be by land, by air, by sea, as best I can say, and it will reach as many folks as we possibly can. We, of course, have a huge Hispanic community here. We have a huge AAPI population here. We plan to reach out to all of those folks. So that's really like a 30,000 foot view of what we plan to do. But there's so many fun and exciting details in that. I mean, I'm just learning so much about how you sell this product of the Democratic Party to the people in a way that they want to buy it. I mean, they kind of know what it is, but it needs a refresh. You know, we got to remix it in a way that people feel like, yeah, this is, I see myself in this thing. It is not some unrecognizable thing. It is where I belong. You know, we are the People's Party, and we intend to make sure that our messaging is very clear in that regard.
Yeah, thank you for that. Speaker McClinton, let me come back to you for a second about just, you know, you mentioned a little bit about the diversity of Pennsylvania. It's a very big state. You've got rural, you've got urban, you've got suburban. So I'm kind of curious within your own caucus, let alone the, you know, the Republicans, right? So I guess my question to you is, you know, maybe building on what the leader was just saying, like, you know, how are you thinking about building coalitions within the Democratic Party around issues that will speak to the whole of your state?
So it's very crucial that just within our party, we can fully align. One of the challenges that we have as Democrats, because we are true believers, is that we will not exclude anyone. And sometimes we kind of focus on issues that are not wildly popular because we have a big tent. We are not like folks on the other side of the aisle who will proudly ostracize folks with racism, misogyny, sexism. Those are things that, you know, do not define the Democratic Party. But what I think we can do as Democrats is make every effort to recognize that even within our party, we have differences. With only a 1-seat majority, and Democrats also from rural communities in Pennsylvania, from the cities, from the suburbs. I always start with Philly. Philly has 27 state reps because all of us have 60,000 people, just about. And none of the neighborhoods here are the same, from the way they look to the way the houses are, and even to the mindset. So we all serve folks that have different perspectives, but it doesn't mean just because even our own individual opinions may differ, that we can't find alignment, that we can't build common ground. One of the things that I did when I became speaker was start bipartisan breakfast with both the Democrats and Republican first-term members. We had the largest class. There ended up being 35 by the time we finished all the special elections, but we started with 29, and then there were like 33 on the other side. I broke them into small groups, and they all would come and say, well, what's the agenda? And I'd say, so where are you from? What's your favorite food? How old are your kids? You know, like just breaking down the barriers that we have in our mind about, oh, you're from rural PA, you're from the city, or you represent this demographic, or you speak this language. No. What are our commonalities and who are we as people?
I love that so much. I think that so goes hand in hand with what Leader Bowman was saying too about delivering too, right? It's actually about getting stuff done requires people working together across the aisle, across differences. So I love that you said that you were talking about that. Leader Bowman, maybe for you, a question a little bit about, you know, we do, we're sitting here, whatever it is, almost exactly a month before the new administration takes office. How are you thinking about the state legislature's role in working with and where necessary, defending, with some of the stuff that the administration might try to do that you have issues with? So like, how do you think about your role with federal versus state legislative relationship?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We have spent a lot of time in our state talking and thinking about this question. I imagine this is true in a lot of states right now. Core truth, I think, is that state legislatures have always been important, but now they are maybe the most important democratic institution in the country. And particularly for folks who share our values, all the action is going to be in state legislatures. So my advice to my caucus, and what I do not think it is the best use of our time as legislators to spend the next 2 or 4 years resisting everything that happens and spending our time responding to tweets and getting ourselves worked up and being upset. That doesn't mean we aren't going to fight back when core values are threatened or vulnerable populations are being attacked by the federal government. I want to be very clear about that. But our mission as legislators is to deliver results for the people we represent. And to the extent that the federal government is a distraction of that, that's a problem. So the way I'm thinking about it is we are going to develop a caucus agenda that is fundamentally rooted in making the lives better of Oregonians. And we need to drive relentlessly toward that agenda to deliver for people. And there will be times, I have no doubt, we all know there are going to be horrific things that come out of this next administration. We all were there from 2016 to 2020, and we saw what happened. And there will be times when we need to maybe pass laws, strengthen budgets, make those changes. But I just really feel like the key for us as Democrats, one of the lessons we need to learn is that, I think my colleagues have said it perfectly, like economic issues are what people want us to work on. Half the kids in my state are on free and reduced price lunch. Half the kids in my state. Like there are a lot of people who, when they go to the gas station, they're putting in $5 at a time. They're not filling up their tank. They can't afford to take a weekend trip to the coast with their family. They are not as worked up about Trump as some of us who work in government and politics are. They just want their lives to get better. And so that's how I'm thinking about it as a caucus leader for the House Dems. Not to I don't want to dismiss or forgive the horrible things that have happened and are likely to happen. I just think we have to hold that balance of continuing to focus on the priorities that the people we represent have and not just fully spending 2 years reacting to what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, thank you so much. I couldn't agree with that more, actually. And maybe Representative Miller, to you, I asked Ben about the federal state. You talked a little bit about what you're going to have to do in the face of a Republican majority in your state. How are you thinking about that in terms of, you talked about messaging, but how do you think about that in terms of, you had mentioned some of the bills that you're afraid are going to come down, or that are going to come down the pike. How do you think about your role as kind of playing defense sometimes?
Yeah. So it's really akin to what the majority leader just described. I mean, we obviously don't want to get sidetracked and go down rabbit holes on every, potentially nutty thing that comes from Washington over the next, 2 to 4 years. But we will be laser focused on 2026. And of course, we have to be able to maximize messaging and get that turnout in the midterms to the extent we can. So I think it's kind of a dance, particularly when you're coming from a minority party position. There's no way we can just be silent about what's happening, because then, why we got to have something to talk about, right? We have to make sure that we're pointing out the differences between our party and their party. And certainly we are anticipating, because healthcare is such a critical issue in Georgia, the Affordable Care Act coming under attack. And so we are bracing for that. We are already creating message box for things that we anticipate. And I think the way that we thread that needle is not just to run down the rabbit hole, but give the folks something specific to tie the message to. There has to be a good guy and a bad guy in the story. And we want the people of Georgia to see us and our policies as the policies that are good for them, and then point out where there's mismanagement, point out potentially where there might be corruption, point out potentially where there are folks benefiting from these policies that are not everyday Georgians, and make sure that the folks know that we are watching what is happening and we have an alternative vision for the state. Of course, we want the president to be successful. I would want for him to do a good job for the people of this country, because I love this country. And so I'm not wishing any of these terrible things to happen. But I do think that we have to understand, because we've seen this movie before, what we might be up against. And so, our policy, of course, if we had the majority, perhaps we could poo-poo and insulate ourselves more, like as much as we'd like to dismiss this stuff. But because we don't have that power, all we have is the microphone. And we have to make sure that when we are pointing out the differences in these policies, that we have to make them in such a way that it makes sense to folks. So to use the example of, folks that have to go get gas $5 at a time, they're buying 2 gallons at a time. If we're messaging about some policy that comes down from Washington, or some position that comes down from Washington that, the Republican trifecta is trying to echo, then we have to make that message hit folks where it matters most. So it's not that we're silent, it's that you hone in a message that is specific and that resonates with people on things that they care about every single day, like going to the gas pumps, like going to the grocery stores, like affording rent, like being able to purchase their first home, like trying to make their deductible, like the fact that their kid might not have health care. So it's going to be, I think, an intentional dance. We can't just say the things, we can't just message policy anymore. We've got to start talking to people and meeting them where they are. And if we get an opportunity to point out in a clear way why our policies work for them and their policies work for someone else, then I think we have to take that and be really clear in what we're saying.
Thank you. I asked you about defense, so let me end on a more hopeful note. I'm going to ask each of you the same question on our kind of lightning speed round here, since you're all in very different scenarios in terms of your, legislative makeup and who's governor. My question is about a win. So, Speaker McClinton, what's your hope for first win for you?
First win is tough. I'm gonna jump to the budget. A big win will be at the budget with the public school funding. I talked a little bit about it in the intro. Because we have been so unfairly funding schools, giving schools money who have the property tax wealth and don't need it, as we redistribute dollars, doubling down on what we invested last school year will help. Because as I sit in my district office, my top call from my neighbors in Delaware County is, hey, this school board tax bill is out of control. And it is because Harrisburg has perpetually underfunded. But even this year, because our budget was late, they had to send out a tax bill July 1. So I look forward this time having an on-time budget and really being able to help those neighbors who are feeling the pain in their pockets.
Thank you for that. Leader Bowman, a win for you.
So we've got the whole caucus agenda that I'm really excited about. One of my personal priority bills is about what's called the corporate practice of medicine, and is addressing a rapid increase in private equity and large corporations taking over small independent medical clinics and then driving up costs for consumers with outcomes getting worse. So we've got a bill that we've been working on for about 1.5 years at this point that I'm really excited about, and I think is going to make a difference in Oregonians' lives.
Yeah, but thank you. Leader Miller.
Well, I will tell you that there are really 2 areas that I think that, for all the years of Democrats beating the drum about healthcare and beating the drum about our ridiculously loose gun laws, I think that there might be some bipartisan either expansion of Medicaid or some sort of healthcare legislation that will lower the cost of healthcare for Georgians and or increase the number of Georgians who have access to healthcare. I do think that's a possibility. We were in talks last time, didn't make it across the finish line. I hope we can this year. I also think that we might have some meeting of the minds on a safe storage bill. We love and respect the Second Amendment down here in Georgia. And so anytime you start talking about regulating guns, you get a lot of pushback. But I think that it is starting to be clear that it is not an impingement on our Second Amendment right to bear arms, to have responsible measures in place to make sure that our families and our children and our communities are safe. So I do think that we might pull something like that across the finish line in a bipartisan way.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you for the heads up. We'll keep an eye on all of that.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.